This is a video that I'm going to be doing on stealing, basically. Thieving, as I like to call it. What I want to talk about are the good opportunities to steal pots that you don't deserve. Because there are some very clear opportunities to do that in Omaha. They are generally not pre-flop, especially in Limit 08. It's just generally not a terribly wise idea to assume that you're going to be able to steal and make money at it pre-flop. Post-flop and on the river, to be sure there are opportunities, and less frequently on the turn. So what you see here is a hand from a tournament that I played recently. And if you'll notice, I've got pretty decent starting cards. Ace, Deuce, 4 with a 9. Suited, not the ace, unfortunately. But again, not a bad starting hand. And it's at a pretty early stage in the tournament. Not the very beginning, but I'm already down a little bit, and I'm not sure if this hand or the next one is from a tournament video that I'm working on also. So you're going to see either this one or the next one in the next tournament video that I have coming out. But so if we follow the action here, we've got a caller and another caller, and again, I'm shorter stacked at the table, so I want to drive the action a little bit. I'm on the button, so I get to act last after the flop, and I want to see if I can move out some of the blinds, and I end up moving them both out. Now, by raising there, I know I'm not going to move out the two limpers. If they put in 50 earlier, they're certainly going to do it again, and they do. And the flop is not terribly bad for me. I've got the nut low draw. I've got a little bit of protection in the 4. And I've got an interesting card here in that if somebody is on the flush draw, as you'll see here, they are not on the nut flush draw because I'm sitting on the ace. So that's a card to pay attention to, because oftentimes you'll hear people say, and I think I've said it before, if you're not drawn to the nut flush, your draw is no good. And so the action then is it's checked to me as the pre-flop raiser. I'm not surprised by that. And again, I like where my hand sits at this point, so I fire away there because I've got the nut low draw, and who knows, if I can get somebody to fold a mediocre high hand, maybe I'll get lucky. And I get a call and another call, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we then go and see that the turn is a 10. Now, that card didn't complete any hands. The only way that helps somebody is if they're sitting on a pair of 10s. And again, I don't see a lot of possibility of one of them limping pre-flop in a pot at a full table with a pair of 10s. It's certainly possible, but it is not a terribly likely scenario. So it's checked to me, and I think about firing here, but my problem with that is this, is that if one of them is on the low draw, they're probably going to call me. Because if I bet out 100, then it's going to be really good odds for them if they're on the nut low, and decent odds if somebody's got, say, 6-7 of clubs, or even 2-3 of clubs, or something like that, then I'm going to be called. Now, I did check, and the next card is a 10. Now, again, that's not a terribly scary card. In fact, that's a really good card for me. I've missed my low, and if somebody bets into me, I really have to fold that. But because they've checked, they've limped, they've checked, they've limped, they've checked, I actually expect this to be checked to me, in which case I'm going to fire at it. Because if they were on the low draw, they've missed. If they have, say, ace-8 or some such pair, that's not a very powerful hand. Even ace-king isn't looking great there, because I've been driving the action the entire way. It's entirely possible that they put me on aces, and it is in fact checked to me, so I fire out. And, I'm betting 100 to win 5.25, which at an early stage of a tournament, I don't mind doing that at all. If I lose this, I'm of course pretty short comparatively, but I'm still not anywhere near close to being out. These aren't critical chips, but if I win this pot, if I steal this pot, I'm back up above even. And I get a fold here, and then I get another fold, and I take that pot down. So it's an excellent opportunity for me to have fired at that, because that last card missed every draw. It missed a low draw. It missed any straight draws that might have been out there. The only hand that is going to possibly call me would be maybe ace king. Anything else is probably going to raise me, because you're looking at a boat at that point, or fold. So it was a great opportunity to fire off a bluff there and take down a decent sized pot and get me back into this tournament. Okay, now this hand is a different tournament, and I said one of these you're going to see again, though only passing and not with this kind of analysis on it. But as you can see, I'm down here. I'm the one with the cards you can see. I've got a pretty good starting hand, but again, I'm in pretty early position here. I'm under the gun to act first. As I think you've all heard me say before, I love ace-3 suited. It's my favorite hand in Omaha 8. Because it's pretty easy to not get yourself totally caught up with it. And it's also an easy hand to win a fairly sizable pot with, because everybody plays ace-deuce, so if they get counterfeited, then you're sitting in the catbird seat. Now, in this hand, again, this is much later in a tournament, and as you can see, I am in decent chip position, and I tend to be exceptionally aggressive in 08 limit tournaments. And this is no exception. So I go ahead and raise here, and the action that I get is a fold around to the small blind, who calls, and he had been calling a lot. And then the big blind has, getting 5-1 odds on that call, so I'm going to pretty much call with anything if I'm him. And then the flop comes deuce 3-10, which doesn't help my hand a ton. I've got the second low draw, but I have no clubs. I've got 3 diamonds, which again makes, every diamond I have makes it less likely that one of my 2 opponents will have one. So it increases the chances of them having a flush already, but only marginally so. I'm interested to see what the action is here, and then it is checked to me after I've bet. Now, I made a determination not to fire there, because I can easily see one of them sitting on a weak flush and just sort of calling it down. And then a check there allows me to see what happens with the turn card, and it's another club. Well, that's interesting in that it obviously lessens the chance that one of them has a flush, again, though only marginally. But then the action goes check, check. Well, at this point, I've kind of shown a little bit of my hand, I think, with my last check. In that, had I continuation bet, I might very well have taken it down on the flop. But now that I checked there, and then it's checked to me again, and I haven't made my hand yet, I've got a decent low draw, I feel there's absolutely no reason to put any more money into this pot until I know what the situation is with the totality of my hand. Basically, have I hit my low or haven't I? Or, I guess maybe I could get lucky and draw another 3, but then even still, I'm going to win a small pot or lose a big pot with trip 3s here. And so I check, and then the river card comes and it's another club. Well, that's exceptionally interesting to me. These folks have shown no aggression in this hand. The odds of one of them having a couple of clubs have gone down dramatically because there are 5 on board. There's no low, which is of critical importance. So if even they have a terrible low draw, say, 8-7, then they're obviously not going to call a bet. And they both check to me. So my options here are to check this down and lose, because I have no doubt that my pair of threes is not good, or to bet and try and take it. Now again, I have more chips than either of them, though it's close, and this is a fairly decent pot. If I win it, I move solidly into second chip place in the tournament. If I lose it, it doesn't dramatically alter my standing. If Clint63 here wins it, then he moves into second place, but again, I'd still be at 2,200. So I go ahead and I fire out a bet. And I get a fold, and then another fold. So I took that down just because I was paying attention to what was going on. There is no way that my pair of threes was good. It's just not conceivable that one of them didn't have a 9, 10, or king. But really, can they call there with just a naked 9, 10, or king? The only hand that can call me at that point is probably two pair. And again, anything better than that, and they're either having already bet or raising me if they've got a flush. So, that's again a situation where their passivity allowed me to take advantage and really improve my position in this tournament. Okay, now in this hand we're significantly later in the same tournament, and as you can see, we're at the bubble, and I am a pretty dominant chip leader at this point. So what happens here is I've got, a really bad hand. I hate 8, ace, jack, deuce, even double suited. I don't like this hand. But it's folded to the small blind who just calls, and I am not going to fire out a raise here on the off chance that he decided to get fancy with a really good hand and three bets me, and at that point I'm stuck with either a terrible call because I've got the odds to, or an even worse fold because I was full of it. So I check, and the flop comes, a couple of diamonds with a deuce. So I've got bottom pair and a really bad flush draw. I guess it's third nut flush draw. And it's checked to me. Well, he limped. It's possible that he's got something like ace deuce. It's possible that he's got, a bunch of middle cards. Who knows what he has, having limped. I don't know why you don't raise if you're going to play from the small blind when everybody's folded to you, especially when you're one of the shorter stacks in the tournament. But be that as it may, what he did was he limped and then he checked. So at this point, even though I'm betting kind of on the come here because my hand obviously hasn't really turned into much with just a pair of eights at this point, I'm going to bet just to see where I am. And he does lay it down, so I take that pot down. I'm not sure if this one is thieving so much or just, sort of good sense as to understand what's going on in the tournament. But it allowed me to pick up another 200 chips in this tournament where I'm already, a pretty dominant chip leader. Okay, now this is a hand, I'm at a cash game, and you should note that there's a short stack in the small blind. I'm just playing 2-4 here, but I've got a pretty decent starting hand, a double suited ace deuce with a pair of nines, which again, nines are not a great pair. But it is what it is, and it is folded to me. If I'm going to play this hand, I believe that you have to play it for a raise, so I bump that. If I'm the first in the pot, I'm almost always going to be raising. And it's then folded to the small blind who calls, which is kind of unfortunate because he's basically pot committed at this point. I don't know why you don't just raise there and shove it all in to try and eliminate the big blind. He didn't, and again, we can't determine what they're going to do. We just have to react to it. And now here we get an interesting flop. This is one of my favorite spots to steal because what we've got is two low cards, the deuce 7 and a pair of sevens. Anybody playing ace deuce is looking at this, as my hand is, and saying, crap, that just kills my low draw. But what it also does is it allows me the unique opportunity to steal when it's checked to me. So I bet that, because really, what's going to call? Well, a flush draw is going to call me, and if they do, I have to reevaluate where I stand at that point. But I'm putting 2 in to win 12, and even if I do get called, well, if they hit their flush, I've got to hope that it's the 9 so that my boat. And again, flush draws aren't likely to call here because there's already a pair on board. What is likely to call is, say, a naked 7, or somebody slow playing a set of 2s, but as I have one, that's pretty unlikely. Overpairs are likely to call. Ace 3 is certainly going to call me all day long with that. And I'm betting into a short stack here. So, again, I'm kind of expecting that I'm going to have to show this down, but miraculously he folds, and then we get another fold, and I scoop that pot because, I don't know. I guess they're just not interested in committing chips when they think that they might be drawing dead already. And that's why the aggression really pays off sometimes. And again, my hand was pretty much garbage. Although at that point I have to assume that maybe my 9s were good. Okay, now this is another hand at the same table. And this is one of the only times where I kind of feel like it makes sense to steal on the turn. So that's a little bit of a warning that that's where this action's going to happen. Now, I don't know why the hand replayer shows these 3 seats as empty. I'm at a 6 max table. But be that as it may, I'm the small blind, and the action is folded around to me. Now, I've got a double-suited ace-3 with an 8. This is a pretty good hand, and again, as I've said before, if I'm the first one in the pot, I'm going to make it worth my while and raise. And I get called, and I see what is just a brutally bad flop for my hand. I've got a pair of 3s with a really bad low draw now. I've got no flush draw. But if he puts me on ace deuce, he might fold right out when I fire out here. And as I've been the aggressor, I see no reason to stop until I'm told that I'm behind. I'm generally going to assume that I can win this pot by betting, and I'll do that. So he calls me. Now, here what happens is we hit the deuce. So if he's playing a hand just like mine, let's say he has exactly my hand, just the other 2 suits, or something, approaching that, then he's looking at an awful draw. So because that 2 hit, if an ace hit, I'd do the same thing, for what it's worth. But because that counterfeit card hit, and again, it's because I assume that he's probably playing something like ace deuce, if I bet here and he has ace deuce and a couple of rags, he's got no choice but to lay that down, because he's just been counterfeited. And I bet, and he does indeed lay it down. So we're able to take that pot just by continuing to be aggressive, and getting the right card on the turn makes all the difference for us there. Now, here is a good example of where aggression will really make a difference for you. I've obviously got a very good starting hand here. I've got a suited ace-9 with a deuce-3 for low equity. And again, I'm first one in the pot as under the gun, so I'm going to come in for a raise. And it is then folded to the small blind who calls, and the big blind folds. And we get a great flop for stealing. And really what you want to pay attention to is the board texture when you're looking at stealing. 3 suits is optimal. A pair is really good, especially a middle pair. 4s will do, but there's certainly a possibility that my opponent's sitting on a 4. He could have a hand just like mine, but with a 4 instead of a deuce or a 3. But what we really want to see is something exactly like this, with a big card, a pair, so that it makes it that you'll have to draw twice for a low. So anybody who is drawing for that low, even the nut low, is going to have to draw twice and generally make it not worth their while, knowing that they're going to have to put in $6 instead of just 2 to see if they've made it. Now, if he checks here, and I bet, if he calls or raises, I obviously reevaluate and know where my hand is, and I lay it down, or just simply shut it down unless I get lucky. But he folds, so just my aggression there allowed me to take that pot down. Now, even if he had had just a pair of deuces, I'm behind at the moment. But a little bit of aggression, paying attention to what the board looks like, paying attention to the fact that if he's drawing for a low, he's toast, and it allows us again to steal yet another pot. And trust me, those $8, $10, $12 pots start to add up. Now, in this pot, again, you'll notice that I'm in the same spot. I guess I kind of abused this table that I was at for a little while. They were all pretty passive and made it kind of easy to steal against them. So I did. Didn't really get involved in a whole lot of hands where I wasn't either stealing or having a hammer lock on the hand. Now, I've got a decent starting hand, and it's limp to me. So I'm going to just limp again. If I were the first person into the pot, I would have raised. Even with a hand such as this, because I want to take the initiative. And when you limp from early position, you tend to attract a crowd because everybody's got better pot odds to stick around and see a flop. And in fact, everybody but one does. Now, the flop is pretty brutal for my hand. There's no low. There's not going to be a low. I've got effectively no draw to anything at all, yet there are 5 limpers in the pot. So really, it's now checked around to me. So I'm looking at this and thinking, well, I obviously can't check this and expect to win the pot. I've got 5-1 on my money if I fire a bet out here. And let's look at what could call you. If you think about what could call you, a couple of spades are going to be hesitant to call, because even if they hit, somebody betting in this position might boat. So I do fire out, because I'll know where I stand based on what their action is. So, and I also pinch these 3 people in between. He's got to now wonder, well, do I have a hand? Or maybe does this guy have a hand? Or one of these guys? So this guy, even with, say, ace-10, is going to muck. Even with, say, a queen-high flush draw is going to muck. He might stick around with the nut flush draw, but again, he could be drawing totally dead. So he does lay it down, and then we've gotten rid of everybody up until the guy who was last to act after I've bet, and he indeed lays it down as well. So yet again, by paying attention to the board, I've stolen a pot. Now, it will not work every time. I could fire that off there and run into quad kings, or tens full, or queen jack of spades, any number of hands that are going to call me down. But again, if you think you've got a better than 1 in 6 odds of taking this down, then by all means bet. And until somebody tells you otherwise, take the initiative. This hand, what you'll see is that I've got a double-suited deuce 6-7 jack, which is not a terribly great hand, but it's also not horrible. And I raise here because I'm the first into the pot, and I had found this table that you see here to be pretty limpy. And I get a couple of folds and then a call, and then the big blind folds. So there's $10 in the pot, and the flop comes 5, 6, 9, a couple of clubs. I've got a second pair here. No real great draw. I've got an awful low draw, and my hand just doesn't look very good. There's a flush draw out there. There's a possibility of a straight already, but it's checked to me, so I'm going to fire away here. And I do that because I'm hoping, frankly, that he just lays it down. I showed strength pre-flop by raising in early position, and this person had shown a clear ability to pay attention to what was going on in my time at the table with him. But he does just call. Right now, I think, my hand's obviously garbage. I'm basically praying for another 6 here. Otherwise, there's just no way I'm going to win this pot without possibly stealing it. Well, now the King of Clubs comes up, which is a really bad card for me because it completes the flush. However, what it does is it makes it much more likely that there's not going to be a low. If it's bet to me, I've obviously got to fold here. But our opponent here checks, and because I'm worried that he could be playing something like, ace deuce of clubs, or any club draw, or even a decent low draw, and he's probably going to call me if I fire out, so I check behind him. And on the river, we get a queen. So that queen doesn't really do anything. I mean, if our opponent's playing Jack-10, good for him. Now, I've checked behind him, which is a pretty weak move on the prior street. And, my assumption is that if he's got a hand, he's going to bet it out for value, hoping that I've got enough where I have to call him. And he doesn't. He checks it. So at this point, there's obviously no way that I can show down what has become fourth pair with a jack kicker and expect to win this pot. Even just your average hand, unless he's playing ace deuce 3-4, I've got basically no chance to win here. So there's $14 in the pot, which means that if I check, I'm not going to win it. If I bet it, that basically means I need to win this pot once out of every third and a half, out of every third time, really, to make money. So I fire away here, and if you look here, what does he call me with? He's going to call me with maybe 2 pair, aces, kings and queens, kings, any king 2 pair. He's going to obviously raise me with a lot of hands. And there is a lot of basically misses that he throws away. He's probably going to throw away an ace-queen. He's probably going to throw away a naked king. He's certainly going to throw away a 6 or a 5 or a 9 on most occasions. Now, what happens here is, and you can't see it in the, well, actually you can, right down there at the bottom it says that he has requested time. Now, as I've said, this is a guy who I've played a number of hands with, who's been very observant, and he makes what is quite possibly the most stunning call I've ever seen here. And I'll show that call, and then if you look, he's got my 6 out-kicked, which is just mind-boggling that he made that call. Now, more power to him if he's willing to make that call, because really, 90% of the time, even if I'm bluffing, I'm beating him. I could make that bet with just a queen, or just a 9, or even just a naked king, hoping to just walk away with that pot. And for him to call me there, again, if he's going to call that hand, he deserves that money. And in fact, he and I chatted about this for a few minutes after this hand took place, and I told him I thought it was just a magnificent pickoff, that I didn't think he could conceivably call me with a hand like what he had, and he's got pretty much the hand that I put him on. He's got a suited ace with a bunch of low cards, and that's exactly the type of hand that I would have expected to have just folded as quickly as I had fired out that bet. And his response was that basically he had been paying attention, and that my bet seemed odd, and that it just didn't make sense based on the way that we had been playing before. And again, you're not always going to win your steal attempts. But the fact is that if I know that this guy is willing to call me with a hand like that, it makes it a lot easier for me to value bet 2 big pair there, king, queen, and not worry that he's going to run me over with a bluff re-raise, or that he's slow playing the nut flush with the nut low draw, things like that. So it was an excellent hand example, and I thought he made just a stunning call. I can't even say that I think it was a good call, but it won him the pot, so it obviously worked.